Welcome back to the Robert E. Howard Foundation channel. Today we're going to start looking at Robert E. Howard's Western Tales from his book that the Foundation Press has put out. Western Tales. These contain all of his straight Westerns, his weird Westerns, and his Western poems. And joining me for this discussion is Jim from the Mystery and Mayhem channel. Welcome,
Hi,
Jim.
everyone. Hello.
And Evan from the Stygian Dogs channel.
How's it
Welcome,
going?
Evan.
Thanks. Yeah.
And I would like to point out for everybody, I'm going to go ahead and link it in the description that Evan just did a video looking at some of Robert E. Howard's Western stories, two of which we will be looking at tonight. So we're expecting Evan to really wow everybody with his knowledge of these two stories. So I thought we'd start off the discussion with talking about the general history of Western fiction in the United States, and from the United States, the rest of the world. And for where it started from shortly after the founding of the United States as a nation, going on into the pulps that Robert E. Howard was writing in. And we'll just kind of briefly talk about some of the biggies of the Western fiction world and whether a lot of them Robert E. Howard read. And we'll talk about that. So usually for me, the first person I think of that really started off on writing Western fiction was James Fenimore Cooper and his series of novels involving Natty Bumppo, the the Deer Slayer, the Last of the Mohicans, and Pathfinder, I think, and
The
something
Pioneers,
Pioneers.
which
Yeah,
is, which is the only one of his books that I have, which I have not read. But yeah, the Pioneers. I think that might have been the last one in the series.
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
And uh, of his books, I've only been able to read The Deer Slayer so far, and I thought that was a very interesting, entertaining book. I know that Mark Twain wrote a famous essay on all of the many writing sins that Cooper wrote or committed when he was writing his Western stories. Have you had any chance to read any of Cooper's stories, Evan?
I've read the two. I've read Last of the Mohicans and what was the other one? The Deer Slayer?
Deer Slayer.
Yeah. I've read those, but that's been like 30 years ago. And I think at the time too, it felt more like an obligation to read
Uh,
those
was it
rather than out of
was
enjoyment.
that it for school that you had to read those?
Yeah, I think so.
Uh,
Yeah. This goes that far back anyway.
and let's see some of the other people starting from Cooper. You get into really, I guess, the autobiography of Davy Crockett, or David Crockett, as he's actually supposed to be called, which was a uh, humorous, tall tale look at his life that was written while he was alive. I don't know if he actually had anything to do with the writing of it. I think it was just written by other people. And if I remember correctly, I think that was one of the things that he was always saying, I'm not the person that they wrote about in my autobiography. And that always hounded him. But starting roughly about the 1860s, 1870s, we had things that started popping up in popular literature. I guess possibly running from the penny dreadfuls that were over in the United Kingdom. But we had the appearance of the dime novels in the United States. And they would cover all sorts of subjects. They were the precursors of the pulp novels. And the Western dime novels really were selling fairly well from about the 1860s, 1870s on. And they would set up a Western story. They would sometimes use actual people, such as Wild Bill Hickok, or Buffalo Bill Cody was also very famous with a series of dime novels written about his alleged adventures in the West. In addition to the dime novels, have you guys read any of the dime novels?
I have
I have
I have
not.
I have a collection here, just one little slim paperback
Uh,
that kind of reprints a couple of the dime novels. I should have pulled it out actually, but it wasn't Buffalo Bill Cody or Wild Bill Hickok, but it was along the same lines. It was almost, you know, I mean, they were very tall tales. Those dime novels, you
yeah,
know, almost mythological in their telling.
Yeah. Yeah. About the same as with David Crockett's autobiography. It's, the truth and the dime novel rarely met outside of possible potential names, dates, and setups. So, but I haven't really read any of them either. So then we start getting into these serious writers, starting with the later half of the 19th century, that really started to write on the Western history, the Western frontier, what was going on in the West, such as Bret Harte, which uh, Bob Howard did read some of Bret Harte's poems. He said he liked Bret Harte's poems. We don't know if he read any of Bret Harte's actual fiction. Mark Twain also started writing about what you would consider Western fiction, starting with, of course, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. And then, especially as he was over in San Francisco writing for the newspaper and he'd be writing his short stories, there would be some element of Western action, locations in those. And then you have Ambrose Bierce, who was one of Howard's favorite writers. And Ambrose Bierce writing about his experience fighting in the Civil War, American Civil War, and starting to write fantastical stories, ghost stories, supernatural stories, psychological horror stories. And that influenced Howard a lot in his early writing. And we'll see that probably part of it in one of the stories we talk about tonight. Howard never read Owen Wister's The Virginian, as far as we can tell. We don't know. He never mentioned it in any of his letters, but that was probably the first big book that really kicked off how to write a Western story. And that was, I think, around the turn of the century, and starting about the late 19 teens, early 1920s, the dime novels then morphed over into the pulps, and the Western story pulps became a huge best-selling genre of the pulps, because the pulps always had several genres. Whatever they thought people would be interested in reading, they would write stories about and put it in a pulp to see if it would sell. And so the Western pulps took off, were always bestsellers, and I think they migrated over, once the paperback started coming in and started putting it into the pulps, because people could buy, pocket-sized paperback books to read instead of the large size cheap pulps. They started buying the paperback books, and Western novels, Western writings, and paperbacks have taken off and are still a huge best-selling genre today.
Would you
So
say would you say that the westerns really kind of started the pulp genre? It was pretty much started with the westerns, didn't it?
I would say they had some with it, but it was also, you had some of the, like Frank Merriwell, the Nick Carter dime novels,
Right.
where you had the adventure as well as, mystery, the beginnings of mystery leading up to the hard-boiled pulps.
Tales
Those,
of Pauline kind of thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
those really kicked off the jump into the pulps, especially Frank Merriwell and Nick Carter, and uh, that type of genre there. Um, you guys have anything that you would like to add on just the general history of the writing of
Well,
westerns?
I read a couple of Bret Harte's stories today. I've read them before, but the book's been on my shelf forever, and I hadn't read them for a long time. I read the first two, "The Luck of Roaring Camp" and "The Outcasts of Poker Flats," and he's just an awesome writer, just very almost whimsical, but yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's funny.
Very good stories.
I went to my bookshelf to see if I had any westerns whatsoever, and I don't think I've read anything
Wow.
from like literary western genre. I mean, there's the ubiquity, right? We grew up watching TV, wanting to be the
Yeah.
Lone Ranger, Zorro, every TV show,
Oh
every
God.
movie.
Yeah, Maverick. I'd come home at lunchtime.
Yeah,
Maverick would be on TV.
absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, Rio Bravo, Magnificent Seven, High
Oh
Noon,
yeah.
like just everything. But I don't think I've read a single Western
Yeah,
until recently.
I read another. I actually finished a Ray Hogan novel today, and which I really enjoyed. And they go quick.
yeah.
You should pick up a few Western, just little Western paperbacks, Evan, and they're so good. They read so quick, and they're so satisfying. You know.
I've got a bunch of Louis L'Amour's that I
Yeah.
grabbed
Oh
from
yeah.
one of those little free libraries. So
Yeah.
I'll give
Yeah.
those a go. We'll see how they go.
And,
Yeah. He's
and,
good.
and y'all bring up the fact that starting with the turn of the century, Westerns hit it big, especially in the United States for movies. And then when television came along and television in the 50s, 60s, on into the 70s, until, apparently hit the saturation point in the 1970s, where the Western movies started dying out, except for the odd occasional one that breaks through. And you just don't see any Western TV shows. I can remember growing up in the 60s and 70s and watching all these Westerns on television.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and especially,
Bonanza,
yeah,
Gunsmoke,
Bonanza,
Ponderosa.
High Chaparral, Gunsmoke. Of course, my father loved Gunsmoke, and there again, you also have for radio uh, during the 1920s on up to the 1950s. Western radio shows were big hits too, and Gunsmoke started out as a radio show in the
Hmm.
1950s
I
and
didn't know that.
was so popular that they decided once television started becoming more and more television sets started ending up in homes that CBS decided, well, let's go ahead and see about turning the radio show into a TV show. And so it ran from the late 1950s to I think it was 1980. It
It
might have
was the
been.
longest running TV show for the longest time. I
Yeah.
don't know if any of that. I think maybe The Simpsons has outdone it now, but
Yeah.
yeah, Gunsmoke ran for a long time. Yeah,
So,
I I tended to watch like I haven't seen a lot of Gunsmoke episodes because it was older. It was a little bit before my time, even though it went up into the 80s or whatever. But I watched a lot of Bonanza too,
yeah.
Yeah,
and
definitely
they were
Bonanza.
great stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
ran for about 8 seasons, I think, 8 or 9 seasons. It went for a while,
I think it actually ran for,
maybe longer, 11.
yeah, it was like, I think it's over to 10. I
Yeah,
can't remember because I think it was maybe a few years shorter.
until, like you said, people
Yeah.
just kind of got tired of westerns and they just weren't interested
Yeah.
anymore.
And because, I know it died out sometime probably in the early 70s for Bonanza because growing up, of course, you had the science fiction TV show Battlestar Galactica, and so Lauren Green was free to take over a role.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
Where that was 1977 or 78. So
Commander
yeah.
Adama. Yeah,
But
Canadian, by
because
the way, Lord Green,
yeah,
Canadian.
yeah.
That's right.
You guys it's taking our jobs. But because of this, because the Western was so popular at the start of the 20th century, and both written forms and the pulp magazines, as well as in the movies, and eventually when radio started becoming in the 1920s on, Bob Howard had a lot of Westerns that he could go and investigate, read, listen to on the radio, go see movies. And then also the fact that as he was growing up, one of the things people may not know is that, his father, Dr. Howard, had a wanderlust where he was always trying to hit it big. So he kept picking up the family and moving from place to place all over Texas, trying to make a killing either with land if there was going to be a railroad going through. He wanted to get there to buy land where the railroad might go through, or where the town may need to start building stuff to service the railroad, or, as you had the oil booms hit, to go hit the oil booms. But they traveled around Texas in a covered wagon for all that time from 1906, from Bob's birth on till I would assume they probably were still using a covered wagon when they moved to the East Texas town of Bagwell a few years before they started moving into the Cross Plains area when they moved to the Crosscut in about 19, I want to say 15 or 16. And some of his letters he would tell, I think it was H.P. Lovecraft, where they had gone down to the San Antonio area, South Texas area, because Dr. Howard had some relations over close to the border, and it was either Carrizo Springs or Crystal City. And so they went over there and they were traveling in a covered wagon that entire way from San Antonio on over. And then from, South Texas, they went back up to North Texas in a covered wagon. So he certainly had experience in moving around in a covered wagon and living sort of a quasi Western life, pioneer life at that time. He started out for school, for compositions for school. He would write Western themed compositions in school. Some of his earliest stories that were published in school newspapers were Western themed. And, he would kind of do Westerns for a while up until his Weird Tales career started taking off in the 1930s. And he kind of dropped writing Western tales after that till about maybe 1933 or so, when he started writing or taking his hand and writing straight Westerns as well as humorous Westerns. I don't know whether he started writing humorous Westerns first or the straight Westerns, but because he had such an incredible string of luck with his humorous Western character Breckinridge Elkins from about 1934 on, he started turning more and more towards writing Westerns. He had the three humorous Western knockoff characters of Breckinridge Elkins, Bearfield Elston, Buckner J. Grimes, and Pike Bearfield. And then he also was starting to hit with his straight Westerns and starting to sell those. So he famously, in a letter to, I believe, both H.P. Lovecraft and Argus Derleth, said that he was probably going to just start writing Westerns mainly from that time on.
Yeah.
And another thing to consider is that, one of his best and one of his actually two of his last great Conan stories, Beyond the Black River and Red Nails, are all basically Westerns done up in the Hyborian Age. He used the fighting or the wars between the Comanche and the settlers of Texas for Beyond the Black River. And then on a trip he made with his friend Truett Vinson to New Mexico, seeing the town of Lincoln, he had a huge interest in Billy the Kid as well as a bunch of the other gunslingers. So that when they went to Lincoln, he got to see Lincoln and he picked up the vibes of being in Lincoln at that time, which he called a ghost haunted town. And he used that along with some other stuff to write Red Nails, which is basically a feud story set in the Old West. But, it's set in a fantastical uh, giant city. And you can certainly say that, he was finally starting to figure out what he wanted to do, and allowing the Western stuff that had been in his, that he'd been living and seeing, especially, in Cross Plains, because he had horses, they had access to horses, so he could ride horses around the area. He started putting that into his stories. So that y'all have anything y'all want to add at this point?
I got frontier vibes from the Black Stranger as well, even though it's
Yeah,
primarily a pirate story, but there's a lot of frontier elements to that story too.
yeah,
And that's why I love it. I love those three stories in particular for that reason. It's like he really found his flow and his niche with those stories.
yeah. And he also, famously said that if he ever really made a name for himself as a writer, it would be as writing a history of the settling of the Southwest.
Mm.
So, I mean, you see what he did with it with, Beyond the Black River, Red Nails, plus his straight Westerns that we'll eventually be talking about, such as the Vultures of Wahpeton, Vultures Roost, and some of the others, that you can see that he had really found something that really excited him and was he
Yeah.
was starting to write, and he was still writing westerns almost up till the day he died, because you can see in his letters that, even in 1936, when his mother was really starting to go down the drain health wise, that he was still able to write especially humorous Western stories for Breckinridge Elkins, Pike Bearfield, and Buckner J. Grimes during 1935 on into 1936, on into the spring of 1936 without any problems with that. So, um, y'all have any?
He he really it was really a different vibe to these Western stories than any of his other stories. And I think it was just, it was because it felt more natural.
Yeah,
Like he knew what he was speaking of. He knew what he was writing about. He knew the characters and the people and the locations. And it seemed to just flow so naturally, these stories. That's reading this over. That's the impression I got. Like totally different vibes from Conan and Solomon Kane and Brand McMorran and all the other stuff. And yeah, just I could see him really perfecting this and carrying on writing these westerns
yeah.
as he said he would.
Uh, uh, that just jogged my memory. There's a letter from him to fellow pulp writer Carl Jacobi, where it was shortly after his story "Old Garfield's Heart" had appeared in Western Tales, and that is one of the weird westerns that we'll eventually talk about.
Hmm.
And he was telling Carl Jacob, because one of the things that had been going on in his letters back and forth with H.P. Lovecraft and with, I want to say, E. Hoffman Price and others, were, especially Lovecraft, where they were, because in the letters that Howard would write to these Eastern pulp writers, he would be a raconteur about what the history and life was like in Texas and in the Southwest. And they all loved what he put in the letters to them about what happened. He would talk. We mentioned earlier, or I mentioned earlier, that he was absolutely fascinated by the history of Billy the Kid. He was fascinated by gunfighters in general, and he knew about Billy the Kid's history, at least according to Walter Noble Burns' book, which, not very accurate. But he also knew about the famous Texas gunslinger John Wesley Hardin, because John Wesley Hardin did murdered one of the Texas Rangers in the town of Comanche, which is not that far from Cross Plains. And that was the murder, after all of the other murders that John Wesley Hardin had done up to that point, that finally made the Texas government and the Texas Rangers say, okay, we've had enough. So they chased Hardin down into Florida, arrested him in Florida, brought him back, and convicted him of the murder and sent him to prison for uh, I can't. I think it was like 40 years or maybe longer, maybe life. And while he was in prison, he became an attorney and got out after 25 years or so, and was not a very good attorney until he met his death in El Paso. But Howard was fascinated with John Wesley Hardin. He was fascinated with the outlaw. Good Lord. Um, who was killed in the central Texas town of Round Rock, Sam Bass, and it was more of a robber than anything else. And he was also fascinated with the feuds, the huge bloody feuds in Texas, and that shows up in some of his writings too. Particularly in Red Nails, where you've got the feud between the two groups in the town. So that's not just generally the Lincoln County War, but it's also the Texas feud, Sutton Taylor feud, or also known as the Hoodoo War or the Mason County War, and the Lee Peacock feud and other stuff. So he just absolutely ate up anything about Western history, especially Texas history. And that started coming out in his writings, his weird stuff, as well as his probably made some of its way into certain sections of his historical stuff. Probably more, that's more based on the historical than anything else, but you definitely see the influence of the Texas West in his Conan tales, and then in his turning to writing the straight Western tales and the humorous Western tales.
Yeah, it's you mentioned the feuds. I haven't read much so far. A couple weird westerns. So The Thing from the Mound, Old Garfield's Heart, but Valley of the Lost. I
Yeah.
mean, that is set. It starts with the feud, and of course, it gets weird.
Yeah.
It's quite the ending in that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely all those themes, right? That
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
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 all the way
And
through.
he mentioned John Wesley Hardin in one of the stories too. I think that I just read, and in context, he was a lawman in some town, John Wesley Hardin,
Yeah.
and with a lot of these bad guys, they did serve as sheriffs or marshals or some kind of lawman
Yeah.
in town, and you almost needed a gunfighter to kind of clean up the town, and a lot of these stories I noticed too. Um, a, a lot of the lawmen are kind of bad guys. They're
Yeah.
not really. There's not a very good light shed on them throughout
Yeah.
these stories.
That's right.
They're more bad than good in these stories. So, you know, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
it's well, sorry, I was just gonna say in Vultures, I know we're not really talking about that tonight, but it was it John Henry who's
yeah.
the real life inspiration for
It's not John Henry. It's
oh no, sorry,
Henry Brown.
Henry Brown. Sorry,
Yeah.
yes. Henry Brown.
For what was that for?
Vultures of
Um
Wahpeton.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
for
yeah,
Vultures where he's he finds himself turned into the lawman.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
seems to be an ongoing theme through these stories.
Yeah. That has in some of the letters that he wrote, he talked about Ben Thompson. Ben Thompson was sort of like a gunfighter but Ben Thompson became the marshal of the city of Austin. And he was famously murdered here in San Antonio in a fight with the people who owned a burlesque theater in downtown San Antonio, along with another gunfighter, bad man, King Fisher, who was the acting sheriff for Uvalde County. So,
So there you go.
And Earp and his brothers were no flowers either. You know
yeah,
that they ran a prostitution ring in the
yeah,
town's Dodge City, I think, if I remember correctly,
yeah,
and they ran the Faro table, so they weren't really good guys either.
yeah,
All right.
Even though the movies like to paint them in that light, but
yeah.
yeah,
And about the most you see in Tombstone or whatever is where they're running the gambling hall there in Tombstone.
yeah,
And
yeah.
although I think if I remember correctly, the uh, Kevin Costner Wyatt Earp movie, they did show that his older brothers were running were pimps and running a brothel at one point.
I couldn't
And
make it through that movie. I
yeah,
couldn't make it through Wyatt Earp. I I had to turn it off after the last hour. I never made it through.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I prefer Tombstone over Wyatt Earp, but I guess I
yeah,
should give it another shot.
and
Been so long. I don't remember.
you know, I enjoyed it because I do like reading about Wyatt Earp myself, but
Me too.
so I was able to watch it. But yeah, it is. They probably needed to make it two movies instead of the one long one.
That's Costner for you.
Costner.
Yeah, make sure you get your money's worth with him. So
Oh boy. I mean, this Horizon movie, Chapter One. I mean, that was his first mistake, making it a Chapter One.
yeah,
And my wife and I went to see it, and we're thinking, you know what? If he had just made an awesome standalone movie, it could have been a long one, could have been two and
yeah,
a half hours, but wrap it up.
yeah,
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why a lot of people, why it didn't do so well. He just
yeah,
he has this ego that he couldn't let it go. Just tell a really good story. There was some good stuff in that movie.
yeah,
He was trying to tell what three or four different stories within it,
yeah,
and he wanted to carry on to three or four chapters. Man, just take one of them, one of the stories in it, maybe one or two, and tell one really good standalone story. And the second mistake he made was putting himself in the movie.
yeah.
But you know,
Costner.
he financed it, so I guess he had
Yeah,
that right to put himself in it. So,
yeah.
all right, shall we start talking about the first few selections of guns of his Western tales now?
Let's do it.
And the first story in the book is Drums of the Sunset. And Howard wrote this when about, let me see here, pull up my stuff. Uh, Actually, let me back up. There's a letter that Howard wrote to his buddy Clyde Smith in February 1929, where he lists all of the stuff that he'd written, whether it was text, prose, or verses that he was writing professionally and trying to sell. And so the first story that he mentions in 1921 is Bill Smalley and the Power of the Human Eye, which we have in, I believe it's the early adventures of, it's either the early adventures of El Borak. No, I take that back. It's going to be in Sentiment and Olio of lesser works, which will eventually be reprinted by the Howard Foundation. Um, he also wrote another Western in the end of 1924 that he titled 4440 or Fight, a short story which he sent off but was not bought, but it has become one of the many lost stories from that time that we don't have. So we have no idea what it was about other than the title of 4440 or Fight. And then the next straight Western that he wrote, well, it's not a straight Western, but it's Spanish Gold on a Devil's Horse, which is in our Pictures in the Fire book, which will be coming out eventually. And that's an interesting one because it takes place in the actual locale of Cross Plains, where it's set on the eastern Caddo Peak, because there are two mountains outside of Cross Plains that are called the Caddo Peaks, or they may even be called the Twin Sisters. I'm not certain about that second one. But the eastern Caddo Peak has a flatter top on it than the western Caddo Peak. And so his story is about people doing horse racing on the top of that eastern Caddo Peak. And so that's that. And then the next,
In something, I'm trying to remember what the hell I've got. Maybe the book of Robert E. Howard, or the second book of Robert E. Howard. That
yeah,
might appear in one of them.
yeah, it might have been reprinted in that.
Yeah.
And then we come to the first story we're going to talk about tonight in 1928, Drums of the Sunset, which he wrote, and his hometown newspaper, the Cross Plain Review, bought it and published it in serialized version starting in November, running from November 1928 to January 1929, and three, or actually not three, nine different serializations in that. And would either one of you like to talk off about that? And folks will probably be doing spoilers on some of these stories. So if you haven't read these stories and are interested, go read the stories and come on back to this.
Well, I
Well,
mean, there'll be spoilers. Go ahead, Jim.
well, I haven't got. I didn't write any synopsis down for any of these. I just wanted to mention um, the one character that's in the story, which I think was a great character, was Hard Luck Harper.
Yeah,
You know, and it was like shades of Hugh Glass or from Josiah Wilberger
yeah,
from that story. Like he was a true guy, where he, this guy, this character in the story gets scalped. He gets shot in the chest, and then he crawls for 100 miles. And I don't know if you guys ever saw The Revenant. Now I know Hugh Glass was a real person, but apparently the events that happened in the movie were kind of fictionalized.
yeah,
But this Josiah Wilbarger that appears in the book was a real person, and the
yes,
same kind of thing happened to him. The strange case of Josiah Wilbarger, and
yeah,
I can't help but think that this character from this story, this Hard Luck Harper, who's bald, he had been scalped and he lost the rest of his hair, and he'd been shot in the chest and crawled, and I thought he was a great character, and he was obviously inspired by this real guy. I imagine he was.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
The Josiah Wilbarger is used to be a very famous story in Texas, and there's a one of the counties that is up in North Texas is named Wilbarger after
wow,
him. So,
a fascinating story. You
uh,
know, and just Howard putting him in this story, he turned out to be an excellent character in the story, like a real, you know, he's almost a cartoon character at first,
Yeah.
but as the story progresses, he's a
yeah,
real hard ass Indian fighter. You know, and he survived this long, and he was just a very well drawn character. I love that character.
Yeah, he comes, he really comes across as eccentric at first, and I'm trying
Yeah,
to find the passage, but where Steve takes note of his lack of hair. I wish I could just find it because when it's finally revealed what happens to him, it's like, oh, he refers to him something like unusually bald. I can't remember what
yeah,
it is. Find it, but yeah, an interesting character. I mean, it's it immediately starts off with Steve. He's traveling through the country. He wants to take that route that he wants to go, and it goes through, and that's when he encounters. I guess it's Gila. I'm gonna say Gila, like
yeah. I would say Gila
I
too.
would say Gila too, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
which is a great name for the villain, right?
yeah,
Um, and then so is immediately redirected, and so like things just, I think what I found about the stories is things happen with an immediacy, right?
yeah,
Like they're short stories, so it's understandable, but things get going quickly, right? It's especially when we talk about Judgment of the Desert, like it's just picks up right away. So it's
yeah.
I love the way it set things in motion. He wants to take the pass. He gets shot. Well, he's warned against going that way. He gets shot at, and then he's got to redirect.
and he's
So
fairly
that
easygoing
seriousnness,
about it, Steve. He's very easygoing about it. He
he
still
is
doesn't,
too, right? Yeah,
right?
he's calm, cool, collected. He's all
Yeah,
good. He's like, okay.
yeah.
And even I guess he gets the bullet through the hat.
Yeah.
And he
Oh, they
shows
were
that
just
off.
funning with me.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then it gets into the comedic, and then it builds from there. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, his name is Steve Harmer, and
Yeah.
roughly about this time, Howard wrote a pirate story, Isle of Pirates' Doom, and the main
Mhm.
character in that is named Steve Harmer or Stephen Harmer.
Oh
So
boy,
you're gonna,
I
especially in this one, you're gonna start seeing that Howard,
Oh man.
that's one of the main failings with Howard is that he was not very good with names, so he would reuse character names over and over in his stories,
yeah.
and it's one of those things where, okay, I remember that name and that person being in this kind of a story. So,
I
A
know
lot of
Evan mentioned it in his video
a
about
lot of
Joan.
Steves.
yeah,
The
Great Joan.
character is Joan in every story, but
Yeah.
then every story had similar names, the same names for different characters, and it started to get like reading it like this, like through it gets a little confusing.
yeah,
How many Elkins were there? You
Yeah.
know,
yeah,
there was a few Kirby's, and there was Steve, like he loved the
yeah,
name
Steve,
Steve,
Steve, Steve.
yeah,
and reading them all through like this, it just started to get a little confusing after a while. And every female character is named Joan.
yeah.
Pretty much. I wonder if
Pretty much.
he had met a Joan that he fancied. I wonder.
Yeah.
Well, because he did write in one of his letters, and I think Rob Ream was hunting it down because, for folks, the story is that Steve runs into Gila Merkin and a beautiful young blonde girl. And he eventually meets the girl again and finds out her name is named Joan. If I forget her last
Farrell.
name, Farrell.
Farrell.
Okay,
Farrell.
Joan Farrell.
Yeah.
But apparently, he may or may not have been smitten with a blonde girl in Cross Plains that was in. I can't remember which church she was going to. I think it was a Methodist church. And so Bob was not a Methodist, but he was going to Sunday school to see this girl, according to the letter he wrote. And I think Rob Ream was trying to track him down and see if we could find out what her name was. But I don't think I can't remember whether he either determined that it was probably prevarication on Bob's part, or we just don't know enough to be able to say, okay, this is definitely who the person was that
Was
he
it
was going
one
after.
of these characters like Jack Palance in City Slickers where he just saw her from the rear view and that's he never introduced himself, didn't go and say this. He just kind of, that was the view he had of her, and he just was fine with that for the rest
No,
of his life.
from what I remember from the letter, he actually did have interactions with her during the Sunday school and the youth ministry meetings and
Really,
whatnot.
that's
But I
interesting.
guess, he stopped going when nothing happened from it, according to his letter or something like that. I don't
Hmm.
know.
And we know her name was Joan.
We don't know what her name
We don't
was.
know.
We
We
just
don't
know
know that.
blonde girl.
Hmm.
So
We'll call her Joan.
yeah.
We'll call
Maybe
her. Yeah,
June, June or Jane.
yeah,
But yeah, hard luck. Harper reminds me of the old Gabby Hayes character in the Roy Rogers movies. you know,
yeah.
kind of almost expecting to, talking like
Yeah.
mush mouth, except
Yeah.
that he does get off some wonderful lines in this story.
Oh
Even
yeah,
though this is fairly early in Bob's writing career, he does write some incredible lines in this story throughout, especially giving them to Hard Luck Harper to say. And, that just makes that character just that much more wonderful to have and to read about. But
He 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 packs a lot into this story too. Like
yeah,
from the climax and then how the story closes out. Like I mean, it's what as I was reading it because I have it in the Zebra volume here. And in here it's broken up into 5 chapters. And I was wondering how was it presented in the Cross Plains Review, serialized in the 9 parts, and do all those kind of fun little elements and twists and turns, are they thrown in to engage the audience throughout that 9 part serialization? That's what I
from
was wondering
looking
as I was
at,
reading it.
I will probably throw up some of the photos we have of the cross-plane review stories that they are, how it's presented in the cross-plane review. But they pretty much do not break at the chapter breaks. They just will break, wherever it seems like a
Mhm.
good point in the story to break, and then continue on in the next serial our next chapter of it. And of course, the Cross Plane Review, I believe, was a weekly. It still is a weekly newspaper now, but I'm pretty sure it was a weekly newspaper even back then in the 1920s, 30s.
Hmm.
So that's why, you've got 9 serials of it, one each week. And that's why it ran from, I guess, for the holiday season, for, November 9th, I think, into early January when the last one ran. But,
Hmm.
and, you know, one of the things is Howard got $20 for selling the story to the Cross Plains Review. So that was pretty good money for what he was making at that time, even especially from Weird Tales, because I'm sure he got the money once they accepted it instead of upon publication, as Weird Tales was doing.
Yeah, yeah.
But one of the great lines that Harper gives off is when he meets Steve, he introduces himself. He says, "My name is Hard Luck Harper, and I aim to live up to that handle." So, you know,
Yeah, and I love how they hit it off immediately, those two, and then
yeah,
they're just like fast friends right away,
yeah.
which I thought was great.
Yeah, Hard Luck tells him the history of what's going on with Gila Merkin and his men up there, that they're dealing with the Indians for some reason, and that, they're having problems with the Indians at that time, that the Navajo live in the area, and that they're getting whiskey from somebody, which they shouldn't be getting at all, which is tending to go into the stereotype of which there's some basis to it of
Yeah,
not just Indians but anybody getting liquored up and going out and causing havoc. Um, but you know, Hard Luck also tells Steve about how he ended up in the area, that he and a buddy of his named Hanson, Bill Hanson, and we'll see that name again, were in the area prospecting for gold, and that they found an incredible vein of gold that was the richest that they had ever seen. And at the moment that they find it, they get attacked by the Cheyenne Indians, and that Hanson is killed immediately. And that's when Harper gets shot in the chest, and he plays dead when the Cheyenne come up and they scalp Hanson. And then they think that Harper's dead, so they go ahead and scalp him too. And he was able to keep quiet and act like he was dead while they did that. And then after they left, he crawled off and was able or ran into some buffalo hunters who nursed him back to health. And he lost where the gold vein was. That apparently this area in the mountains have a lot of landslides, and that there's been landslides, and he does not know where the gold vein is anymore. But he knows it's up there somewhere, and he doesn't know whether Gila Merkin is looking for the gold vein. He suspects not, but that you can't go up there and look because Gila Merkin is up there living, and will shoot anybody on sight that goes up there. And the story continues where Steve, of course, wants to go see what's going on and find out what Gila Merkin's up to. And he runs into the blonde girl again, and he comes upon her as she's being accosted by one of Gila Merkin's men who's trying to get a kiss from her and tell her he's going to marry her. And she's saying, no, no, no. And as he's trying to kiss her, she punches him in the face, and that sets the guy off. And he grabs her and is going to kiss her really hard this time. And Steve's watching all this, so when he sees it, he jumps up and sucker punches the guy and saves the girl. And that's when she identifies herself as Joan, and that she knows Steve's name because, of course, she was riding with her uncle, Gila Merkin, and that she hates her life there, that she wants to leave, but her uncle won't allow her to leave. So uh, I guess they decide to have a courtship or whatever, get sweet on each other, or actually Steve falls in love with her. And that's this story, you can kind of see that Howard was writing this story for a general audience, of people in Cross Plains to enjoy, because it's not really violent, brutal like you would expect from his other stories. It's just a good all around, almost, you know, all audience style story for people to read. You know,
He doesn't shoot the top of anybody's head in this story, I don't
yeah.
think.
And
Only a good scalping in there. That's all.
You
yeah,
only,
that's
yeah,
true.
not a complete scalping, just a little,
That's
little,
right.
little
Yeah,
scalping.
not full
Yeah.
scalping.
And so, Steve wanders off and his head in the clouds says, oh, I love her. I love her. And that's another great thing is when he gets, because he's staying with Hard Luck Harper, and they're trying to go to bed that night. And Steve's still babbling about Joan, and Hard Luck says, for the love of mud, will you shut up so I can get some sleep? And so, it goes on where eventually you learn that not only are the Indians getting whiskey from somebody, but they're also getting counterfeit money from somebody because they're showing
Yeah.
up in town and with counterfeit money. So that's another interesting mystery involved. And the story finally breaks into the Indians finally decide to go, and they attack Gila's cabin and kill everybody up there and take Joan and kidnap her. And so Steve and Hard Luck go chasing after to save her. And you have another wonderful line I thought that, actually, even before that, it's Steve Harper when he's in the throes of love, no, I take that back. It's when he's deciding that he's going to stick around and go see what Gila Merkin's up to. He says, Hard Luck, I've been thinking. And Hard Luck replies, don't strain yourself, son. It ain't a good idea starting on new things. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And, when they get up there and see that the Indians have just killed everybody at the cabin and have taken Joan off, that Steve says, oh, where the heck is that? Where did I write that down? Oh, yeah. He tells, because I don't know why want to keep saying Hard Luck Henry. Hard Luck Harper, in addition to being prospector, used to be an old Indian fighter. And so when they find out, Steve turns to Hard Luck and says, you know, lead on, I'll follow you wherever. He says, lead on. All I ask is for you to get me within shooting and stabbing distance of them devils. To which Hard Luck replies, son, your wants is simple and soon satisfied.
That's it.
So, just great
Yeah.
stuff like that. And so they go off, and I guess we probably won't talk too much about how the story ends, but it does end happily because it is set for a general audience to be read during the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
I,
did you
I
guys?
I thought the counterfeiting was an interesting twist. I mean, I don't think I've ever read about a counterfeiting operation in any of the westerns I've read.
Yeah.
So that was interesting that was put in there.
Yeah,
Yeah. It
And
was,
that
and it was a definite fake out too on Bob's part, right? Like I think he
yeah,
wanted you to think that they had found the gold vein
it
and
was
that
about the
that's what they were
gold. Yeah.
putting. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that was a definite twist he had there. Um, the foreshadowing in this story I thought was great. I mean, the ending is is extra happy, right?
yeah,
But I think like all through the story, they're commenting on the landscape. Steve's commenting on the landscape and the precariousness of it. And then Hard Luck, I think, mentions, landslides and that. But there's just those hints. So something's gonna happen. But the way it's utilized,
yeah.
it was sad. That was very satisfying to me. And then you know, they really up the ante at the end with the very positive outcome
What
of the
was this the story that had the serrated cliffs?
yes.
Yes, yeah, it was. I mean, I loved his description of that. Like
I
it's
mean,
just like he
yeah.
he was there and he knew what he was talking about. He's just describing it.
And
Really
yeah,
well
you could just
done.
imagine the mounds of shale or
Yeah,
whatnot,
shit. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it was so that
and,
was
and that
fantastic. Yeah.
that must
Yeah.
have been a thing, like shale through gorges and stuff. Because I've read other like Louis L'Amour. Which story was it? Was it Flint? But he's done a couple stories where the same kind of thing happens, where it's a very dangerous thing for the horse, where they
The
have to
horse, yeah.
traverse this shale that could just give out at any moment. So that must have been uh, a real danger in this area back in the day.
I
And the
know.
Well,
fact that he used it just makes it that much more
Yeah.
brilliant for you know a young man, one of his first stories.
the during Howard days, when they started Howard days, there's a family that lives in the area that owns a ranch that on their ranch is the Western Caddo Peak. And I think everybody theorizes that Bob, because it's much higher than the Eastern Caddo Peak. So I think, people would go out and go up and walk up, or it's actually quite, a hard thing getting up or Western Caddo Peak
Mm.
because you have on the ground, you have broken pieces of limestone on top of dirt. So the first time I went to Howard Days in 2013, we went out to Western Caddo Peak because they used to put everybody in a hayride and go halfway up the mountain, and then you'd have to clamber up the rest of the mountain to the top, to be able to look around and see the entire area. And going up, you're trying to walk and you'd step on one of those pieces of limestone, which is just lying on top of the ground, and it just slips right out from underneath your foot.
Yeah.
So
Oh boy.
possibly, going up on Western Caddo Peak, and, especially if you're coming down, you got to be real, real careful because you got all your weight on the foot that you're placing out in front of you as you're coming down. And if you hit one of those pieces of limestone, you're going to slip and go.
Oh boy.
So it's, it's
Wow.
possible that maybe he went up on Western Caddo Peak and, seeing how this was like going up and down Western Caddo Peak, he decided, hey, I'll throw that into the story and
Yeah.
people have an idea of what that's like. So
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. But a fun story.
yeah,
Yeah.
Not terribly gritty, but definitely a fun one. So like you
yeah,
say, it's like very family family
yeah,
oriented and enough twists and turns to make it
To,
interesting
to
through the
keep you
9 weeks.
interested.
Yeah.
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 All right. Well, if we don't have anything more to talk about Drums of the Sunset, let's move on to the first two poems in the book. The first one, right after Drums of the Sunset, is the Lost San Saba Mine. And do you guys know about the Lost San Saba Mine?
I
No.
do-
Okay. That is a legendary place in west central Texas, near the town of Menard. And when Texas was the Spanish province of Tejas, the Spanish went up to that area and they established a Presidio fort on the banks of the San Saba River. And you can go see it now if you ever come, if you guys ever come. I know you're coming, Evan, but if you ever make it to Howard Days and let me know, I can take y'all down because we can go see the Presidio, and the Presidio's on the way to Fort McCabe, where you have the famous photo of Bob standing in the ruins of Fort McCabe.
Oh boy, yeah.
But at the time when Bob would have been around that, especially when it went over to go see Fort McCabe, it was still in ruins because the county of Menard and the city of Menard had not started to rebuild it for the Texas Centennial celebrations in the 1930s. But this Presidio was there, and the Spanish were using it as their fort for trading with the Indians, and the Indians in the area at that time were the Lipan Apaches. And so, they also had Spanish missionaries with them, Catholic missionaries, who were trying to convert the Lipan Apaches at the same time. But they were getting allegedly silver and gold from the Indians in trade. And so a legend grew up that there was, a silver mine in the area. And what happened is that the Lipan Apaches, because you had the Presidio itself, and then you had the church, the mission where the missionaries were living and building. And so the Lipan Apaches wiped out the missionaries' church and were going to, attack the Presidio, but I guess they did not have the ability or decided not to. So the Spanish went on ahead and abandoned the Presidio. And so this, as I said, this legend grew up that there was this mine in the area of the San Saba River. And so Jim Bowie, when he was in Texas, decided he heard this legend, so he got a bunch of people, and apparently somebody knew exactly where this mine was around the San Saba River. So they did an expedition of about, I want to say maybe 15 men or so going up to go look for it. And they ran into the Comanche at this time
Oh
and
boy.
had a knockdown, drag out battle with the Comanche that they were able to survive, although they lost, I think, maybe a couple of men and a bunch of others got wounded. And so the legend is that they actually found the mine, and they went back to San Antonio to recover, get medical help for the people who got wounded, and then go back up to go get the silver when the War for Texas Independence broke out, and James Bowie took over as commander of the civilian militia at the Battle of the Alamo and died at the Battle of the Alamo. So
Mm.
there's, ever since there's been this legend of, oh, there's this lost mine out in the San Saba region. So Howard wrote this poem about it, in which he goes through this entire poem, going through the history of the legend of the San Saba mine. And I believe he probably, I don't know when he wrote this poem, but it's a good possibility that he wrote it after one of the great Texas folklorists, J. Frank Dobie, started producing his books of Texas folklore and legends, where he wrote a history of the San Saba mine and that. So Howard may have used that to write this poem, or, because he was in the general area, he might have heard about it from others. And he writes this poem and goes through everything that happens on it.
Is this published anywhere? Was this ever published anywhere, John? Or
Hang on a second. Let me go check Howard Works. You two, please talk amongst yourselves.
I do know that it's in volume 3 of the collected poetry.
I don't have any of the collected poetry volumes. I do like the poetry from the book of Robert E. Howard, second book of Robert E. Howard, and of course in here, but I don't
I
have a
have,
lot of his poetry.
yeah, I've wanted to, and I have the Frank Kaufman book. And I need to apologize to Paul too, because I remember last time we talked, I said, you need to have an index, a full index. He's like, there is one, Evan. And I remember even commenting on one of my other videos. But there is a great full index, and it lists where it appeared originally, I believe, and where it is in each
Indexes are
current
wonderful
volume.
things, aren't they?
Oh my God. Well, that's what I
Yeah,
was loving when I got the last Celt. It's
Oh
basically
yeah,
just a book of indexes. It's like the internet before the internet, and it was just it's so glorious.
I love that. That's one of the very first books I have about Robert E. Howard was that one. I got it in like high school. I love
Oh
that
yeah.
book. But yeah, you're right. It's just all just lists and
It's,
index.
and it's
Yeah,
wonderful.
I will
yeah, it is.
say indexes are wonderful things until you have to keep remaking the damn things
That's
for collected letters books.
Oh,
you you had said
yeah.
that.
I
But
have
here's the
I
entry
have the
for
20. Yeah, you guys know the Time Life Old West books, the leather-bound volumes.
yes.
I have them. I have the 26 volumes. I just last week got the master index for the 26 books.
Oh
It's a
yeah.
paperback pamphlet, but yeah, I finally got it. And it makes such a difference when you're looking, trying to find something specific about someone or an event or something. It's what a difference it has.
Yeah.
It makes having that
Yeah.
master index. They really are wonderful things to have. Unless, like you said, John, unless you're finding new stuff all the time, and
Unless
it's
you're an
got to be
editor.
updated.
They hate me. Anyway, here's the entry for the Lost San Saba mine. It was originally an untitled poem in a letter to H.P. Lovecraft dated April 23rd, 1933. So that probably is
Oh,
that he did write this after reading J. Frank Dobie's book. And the
oh,
first time it actually was published for people to see was in the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press book that we did, A Rhyme of Salem Town and Other Poems in 2002.
wow.
So,
So Evan, have you found that in
Yeah,
your
I mean,
volume?
yeah, I have it. It's I have it in the Frank Kaufman book.
Okay.
It's 10 stanzas.
yeah.
And it's a unique structure to me. I don't know what Frank would classify it, but the structure is line wise. It's A B C C C B as far as the rhyme structure.
Hmm.
Um, there's some good passages,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, yeah. Please share one or two if you want to.
Sure. Well, so this is well. Let's. Oh, I could read the whole thing. That's kind of long. Do we want to read the whole thing or not?
Eh,
I like,
yeah,
okay, I'll just grab a couple.
yeah.
Scalps with their braids and crimson dyed, trailed from Comanche spears, the hills forgot the lip and tongue, but not the songs the ancients sung, and out of the hills the conquerors wrung spoils of the vanished years. Um, I like this. I think this is my favorite. Just a quick glance at it. Like dim and ghostly caravan of painted shapes astride, phantasmal mustangs pass the years. A crest of plumes each rider rears, with sinking reins and drooping spears, the phantom horsemen ride. That's a lovely one.
Uh,
Yeah, that's a great one. That's great.
Yeah, and the
uh,
final stanza just to get there. And men forget the maddening lure which cast men's lives away. Gaunt specters guard the gleaming tills, the gold which seven caverns fills, and under blue San Saba hills it sleeps till judgment day. Oh,
uh,
that's yeah. There you go.
uh, he really loved writing that stuff, especially the poetry that he could about, Texas history, Southwest history.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's a great poem. As Evan just said, it's got 10 stanzas where he just runs through the entire history of the legend of the Lost San Saba mine. So, all
The
right.
fact that writing it for friends is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. Especially for H.P. Lovecraft. So
yeah.
there's like, hey, old HP, there's another one of my poems. What do you think about it? So, all right. So our next poem is John Ringgold. And we did talk about this poem in the poetry video that Evan and Paul Herman and I did a few months back. So uh, I think for those of you who have not seen that, John
You should check it
Ringgold
out.
is an actual historical person. He's better known as Johnny Ringo from the OK Corral, Tombstone, Wyatt Earp, the Earps and the Cowboys uh, feud fighting. And he actually was in Texas at one point in the 1860s, early 1870s, and he got involved in one of the major feuds in Texas at that time, the Hoodoo War or the Mason County War, which lasted for several years and which was a bunch of people getting killed on each side. And it was sort of between ranchers and the German settlers that this was going on.
Hmm.
And so John Ringgold was involved or in that. And at some point, I guess it got too hot for him. So he decided to get out of town. So he went further west and ended up in Arizona, where he threw his lot in with the Cowboys and was with the Cowboys until his death by uh, suicide, or generally believed to be suicide,
Yeah.
in about 1881 or so, I believe. So there's this little poem that uh, Bob wrote about John Ringgold, which shows you he had, this is one of the gunfighters that he liked to read about, although he doesn't really talk too much about the Earp brothers or the Cowboys or OK Corral in his letters. So, uh, do you guys have anything you want to say about this poem?
No, I could read it out if you want me to. It's
Sure,
a short one.
sure, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So John Ringgold, there was a land of which he never spoke, a girl perhaps, but no one knew her name, and few there were who knew from whence he came, for from his past he never raised a cloak. No word he spake except a sneer or joke, or deep in drink to curse men, life, and fate. Often his fierce black eyes, held hot with hate, gleamed wolf-like through the shifting powder smoke. His trail lay through saloon and gambling hall, lone somber devil in a barren land. Perhaps when drunk he dreamed of mansions old, ballrooms and women proud and fair as gold. Trails end upon the strangest stage of all, the sun, a lone mesquite tree, and the sand.
Yeah.
Johnny Ringo. I'll be your Huckleberry.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know about his death, Johnny Ringo was found lying on against not a mesquite tree, but an oak tree by a spring in Arizona, about, I guess, 20 miles east of Tombstone, with a bullet wound to his head and in his socks, with his boots having been taken off and attached to his horse. And they found his horse uh, miles away from him. So the general theory was, and he was also had several bottles of booze with him, so that he got drunk and at some point, for whatever reason, he decided to stop and took his boots off and attached them to his saddle. And in his drunken state of mind, that he did something which spooked the horse. The horse took off running and left him there. And so he just, I guess, just said, "Oh, what the hell," and ended it right there. So, and if you folks are ever interested and you're in the Tombstone area in Arizona, you can go to see his actual grave at the actual spot where they found his body. And it's on private land, but the landowner has set up a place where you can kind of drive in, and then you got to walk through a fenced off area to get to this fenced off area
Hmm.
where his grave is, and the marker stating what happened is there. I don't believe the huge old oak tree that's still there is the exact same oak tree that he died on, or not. I don't know that, but you can also, if you want to, you can also look on the internet, and there are pictures and videos of people going to see the grave site there. And I can't
Have you
remember.
been, John?
I've been to Tombstone twice, but I've never, if I ever get back to Tombstone, I might try and wander on over there to go see what it looks like, because
Yeah.
it does look interesting. All right, let's move on to our second story. I know, Evan, you haven't had a chance to read this,
Yeah.
but it's The Extermination of Yellow, and I do not know how the last name's pronounced. I've always pronounced it as Donery, could be Donory. I have no idea.
I
We
say
don't know.
Donory.
So
Yeah.
pays your money and makes your choice on how you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
And this one, uh, I believe we think it was written about 1930s. We're not real certain. But you can definitely see the influence of Mark Twain and Ambrose Bierce, especially, on the writing of this story. And one of the things that Howard liked, roughly about 1928, he wrote into a guy who was setting up a pen pals contact set list who lived in Pennsylvania. So Howard filled out this pen pals contact list where he was writing down his various interests that he wanted to talk to people about. And he was one of the areas of interest of him was psychology, and he put in parentheses abnormal psychology. And then, when he was writing, later on, and instead of just checking off boxes where he was actually writing stuff in, he said that he would love to correspond with anybody who had personal experience, or dealing with others who'd had, uh, let's see, criminology, abnormal psychology, obsessive dementia, and criminal insanity and compulsory psychosis. So he definitely was interested in psychology, and several of his letters that he was writing to Clyde Smith at this time in the late 1920s, he's talking about his interest in psychology. So the extermination of Yellow Donery is one big, huge psychological story about a coward, Joey Donery, who's been a coward all of his life, who's finally had enough. And he's deciding he's going to end it all at the start of the story because, wherever he tries to go and try to fit in, it usually will work for a while until something happens where somebody will pick on him or something, and he doesn't stand up for himself. And, they start calling him a coward. So he then leaves and moves on.
And the hell of it is, he's a very capable man.
Yeah.
He's a mine hand. He's worked cattle, and he's very capable at what he does.
Yeah.
So just to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And so he finally had enough, and he's been drinking, and he's decided, I'm going to end it all. So he opens the drawer of the dresser in his room, and he's got a gun in there. And then he chickens out. Says, I can't go through with it.
Still
so,
yellow. Still
so
yeller.
he then decides, well, there's this really bad gunslinger in town, Demon Darts. I love that name, Demon
Yeah.
Darts.
Great.
So,
At least,
well, I'll go
at least
get
it
Demon
wasn't.
Darts to kill me.
At least it wasn't like John Kirby or something.
Yeah.
Steve
So,
O'Donnell.
so he goes to where, I guess it's the saloon where Demon Darts is drinking, and as Howard writes the story, you as he's going into the saloon, the guy who's really been persecuting him, at the mine, and has finally forced him to, decide it's not worth it anymore. Bull,
Groker,
Groker
old Groker.
comes walking out and is like, it's Yellow Donery, the coward. And, what are you doing? And, at this point, Joel doesn't care. So he pushes past, he says, I'm going in to see Demon Darts. I got things to discuss with him. Bull, Bull Groker's like, what? And so as he walks into the saloon, it's, Howard does this great description of the saloon where everybody is all having fun except around this one guy at the end of the bar, and there's nobody around him. It's like, oh, that must be Demon Darts. So he goes walking up to Demon Darts, and he starts insulting Demon Darts to try and get him to shoot him. And Demon Darts turns around. It's like, do you know who I am? And Joel just keeps going into him, and suddenly Demon Darts starts thinking, wait a minute. Everybody knows I'm a killer. Why is this guy suddenly trying to get me to kill him? There's something wrong here.
Throws him right off. Yeah.
Oh, dope.
And he's like, go away. Don't make me kill you. And Joel's like, no, no. Just keeps calling him names and attacking his manhood and everything. And the longer it goes on, Demon's like, has he got a gun somewhere? Is there somebody who's backing him up somewhere? And well, I'm not going to do it. And so finally, Joel has had enough. So he goes ahead and he slaps Demon Darts in the face. Everybody's like, oh, the saloon is like, oh, and everybody who's in, at that area in the cone of danger, kind of, you could probably tell they're all moving out of the way. And Demon Darts doesn't do anything. Just startled. He said, there's something. Apparently, this guy's got to be better than me or something. So he kind of wanders out and says, "You're lucky I'm in a good mood, not out to kill you." He walks out, and at that point, Joel's like, "Oh, I can't even get myself killed by somebody else." And about that point, everybody in the bar comes running up to him. "You're our hero. You stood up to Demon Darts, and we didn't know you were that kind of a man." And Bull Groker comes walking in. He's like, "Wow, I didn't know you were that kind of man. I'm lucky you didn't turn around and kill me when I was being mean to you and bullying you." And the mine owner comes walking in when he sees what's happening, and he says, "Donery, you're a capable man. I've been looking for men like you. I'm going to hire you. You're going to be in charge of my mine operations." It's just, one of those funny little stories that Bob was good at writing. And
Didn't you hear like demon darts, um, horse sound go off into the distance as fast as it can go, never to
yeah,
be seen again?
That sounds
It
like a
did a
good
number
story.
on his head, I imagine.
yeah. But you can definitely see, because this is a funny story, but you can
Yeah.
see him playing with the psychological state of Donery, and then you get into the psychological state of uh, Demon Darts, and then the psychological state of Bull Groker. And he's looking at all of these people and what they're thinking, and how they're reacting to everything that's going on. And of course, Ambrose Bierce, one of the things that he liked with his stories was that he loved doing episodes of psychological horror where people would, for whatever reason, their imagination would run away, and they would usually end up getting themselves killed by something that, that in the daylight, if you're seeing it, it's there's nothing there to be scared of. But he also loved to use psychological horror in his stories that he wrote. And Howard did love Ambrose Bierce because several of the little burlesques that he wrote to Clyde Smith in his letters, where he's, check out this story I'm writing. He will either mention Ambrose Bierce as being, a good person, or even in one of them, he actually has Ambrose Bierce as one of the characters in the burlesque. And it's talking very well about Ambrose Bierce. So you can definitely see that there's, the psychological, Howard's interest in psychology and psychological writings, uh, sort of from Ambrose Bierce, where Ambrose Bierce was more looking at the horror, but his were sort of like, dark humor horror kind of things at the end when you find out what the person, they psych themselves up to die from. And you find out, oh, like in one of the stories that Ambrose Bierce wrote about Civil War, a guy is being sent into a forward position in a building to shoot any of the enemy that he saw in this forward building. The building gets hit by a cannon and falls in on him, and he's trapped in the rubble, and he can't move. And as he's realizing that his rifle, which is loaded and cocked, is pointed at his head. And
Mm.
so the entire story is him thinking, what am I going to do if that gun accidentally discharges and kills me? And so, the entire story is that, and he ends up dying, if I remember correctly, because he tries to move the gun, or just finally end it all and click the trigger. And the gun was empty. It didn't fire off, but he died from fright from the gun, as if it
Mm.
actually shot himself. And so, you'll get just interesting little dark humor turns in Ambrose Bierce's stories that you can kind of see working on this extermination of yellow donery, where it starts out as one way, it turns into a comedy halfway through, and continues on as a comedy afterwards.
Yeah,
So,
Joe's like he's shaking the whole time.
yeah.
He's just shaking through the whole time, stammering, shaking. but they misinterpret it as just anger, like he's just
Right,
angry
just
and he's
so
stammering
riled
and
up.
stuff out of
Yeah.
angry.
Yeah,
Just
Yeah,
but just an excellent title,
yeah.
like
yeah.
the extermination of, yeah,
And of course, it killed the yellow Donory. That was his
yep,
name, and it
Yeah.
yeah,
killed off yellow Donory and left Joey Donory in its
yeah,
place. In his
Yeah.
place.
yeah, it's
So that
wonderful.
was interesting.
All right. Uh Come to our next poem, Old Faro Bill. And this, I don't know if you gentlemen know
Uh,
much about the mountain men of the American West,
Yeah,
but one of the things that the mountain men of the American West would do, I forget the exact name, but they would wander around boasting at the top of their voices, telling, I'm so and so. I licked 5 wildcats before I actually woke up from bed. Just going through, yelling at the top of their lungs, this is how great I am. This, and funny things. And one of the, if you ever want to see that in action, if you've ever seen the movie or go see the movie Jeremiah Johnson and the character of Del Gue, which is another mountain man in that, does this boasting where he's riding off, and he's boasting at the top of his lungs who he is and what he's done. And Old Pharaoh Bill, this poem is pretty much just a running, long boasting from a Western character about everything that he gets involved with, all these scrapes that he goes in, all these fights that he goes in, and he always wins because he's so
I,
awesome.
man, if anybody deserves to boast, I think it's those mountain men. I mean,
Yeah,
the stuff that they got up to and the things that they did, before there was any civilization whatsoever, like Jim Bridger,
yeah,
all these guys. I mean, my God, go ahead, boast, man. Like just unbelievable the stuff they did.
yeah.
yeah,
And
it's a good one.
then you can also see this, cross culturally in Japanese history with the samurai at the start of the samurai, where they would engage in individual combat at the start of a battle, but each person who was getting ready to fight would announce who they are, what they've done, how awesome they are, so that everybody would know who they were and either be scared or say, okay, yeah, I'm going to go fight him. And so that, if they fight and whoever kills them, would then say, okay, I killed that person there. So I'm even more awesome. And, next battle, they'd be, yelling out, this is who I am. This is what I've done. Come and take me on, you chickens. So,
But it's kind of like at weigh-ins and prize
yeah,
fighting, right? Like the
yeah,
same thing. You're going down, all the smack
Yeah,
talk, right?
yeah.
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 But, oh, let's see, read a few stanzas from this so that people get an idea of what boasting was like. Old Faro Bill was a man of might in the days when the West was young. He drank a gallon of booze each night, the roughest galoot unhung. Oh, some men shrink at the sight of blood. Bill roomed in a cougar's lair, and for tobacco he carried a cud of Mexican prickly pear. So you can see right there, you know, that he's boasting about old Pharaoh Bill and telling funny stories about him. Old Pharaoh came from a wolfish breed when he was a suckling child. He laughed at the marijuana weed, for he said that it was too mild. Old Pharaoh, he was a buffalo when it came to rough and tumble. He laid the toughest battlers low with never a miss or fumble. Some men stammer and halt and pause at the sight of lovers' moons, but Pharaoh married 100 squaws and a couple of octoroons. So that is the poem of
That's
Old Pharaoh Bill.
that's the word for the day, apparently, octoroon.
Yeah.
Dr. Rune.
And, I guess for,
Slightly controversial ending.
yes,
Noted.
Yeah,
but,
yes.
the next poem has actually confused me because that is the one that where the guy is actually going and it's this long poem where he does go through each of the fights. So I got because it's Modest
Oh,
Bill and Old Pharaoh Bill.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
you know, got to keep your bills separate. But Modest Bill, this is a long poem. Sadly, it's incomplete, so we don't know how it was going to end. But Modest Bill runs through an entire litany of fights he was getting into and beating people in, continuing with the boasting. and the humor.
Yeah.
And
I'm a
so,
shooting, hooting, rooting, scooting coot from Arkansas. I'm
That's
quick
right.
as a cat, smart as a rat, and tough as a grizzly's claw.
yeah, this
And
is
yeah. Well,
this
it's
is
oh,
mountain
sorry.
man boasting at his finest right there in this
Oh
poem.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
some. That's an art form right there, boy.
there's repetition. It's long, like it's 20 something stanzas. I'm a
That
rare and
is.
tearing, barren, scaring guy from Arkansas. If there's a guy that I can't lick, that guy I never saw.
Yeah, it's like
I'm a knife and strife and life and rifling guy from Arkansas. That's something.
it's like 10 guys piled on him one day when he was a chanting of his lay. Sure, they expected him to run, but instead of his feet, he used his gun. When that was empty, he used his knife, and when that broke, he kept up the strife, for he never did know when he was beat. So he fought on with his fists and feet. And when it was over, they was all on the floor. What hadn't gone out by the window or door, and Bender, with torn and tattered clothes, was dancing and yelling among his foes. I'm a knife and strifing, life and rifling guy from Arkansas, and they ain't no man in the whole darn land can beat me on the draw. I'm a whole blamed army by myself alone. I'm a straight hurricane and a twisting cyclone. I can lick any guy from the Gulf to Powder River. Look a grizzly in the eye and make him shiver. I'm a river and flood and an avalanche. If nerve was money, I'd own a ranch. So, but that is pure mountain man boasting right there that you
Oh
can
yeah,
read.
yeah,
Now it's this was interesting when I read it too because it was obviously humorous, but it gets into the whole section on the Mormons and like the vilification
yeah.
thereof,
Yeah.
and I'm not very aware of that history, but it did bring to mind Star Rover, right?
Yeah.
So there's that short story or one of the past lives in Star Rover, and it's a pretty bleak part of the story and kind of
Jack London.
and the settlers that are just massacred by the Mormons. So I just that just stuck out to me knowing
That
Yeah.
was
his connection to that book.
yeah, reprehensible, man. Like what he did. When they went across the trail, the Oregon Trail, they had to get rid of They couldn't use horses. They had to. I forget the leader's name. I should know his name, but he made them pull carts by hand
Yeah.
across the desert, across the U.S. They couldn't use horses. Like you know,
Yeah.
just awful things that the Mormons did to people,
Yeah. Yeah.
or that the leaders did to their people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Brigham Young was the head of the Mormons
Brigham
at this
Young,
time.
Brigham
yeah,
Young.
yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah,
they're
if you
talking
read the
about,
Sherlock Holmes,
the Mountain
sorry,
Meadow Massacre, where the
yeah,
Mormons wiped out an entire wagon train of people traveling down the Oregon Trail
I guess
and
that
tried to make it look like they were killed by the Indians
by the Indians, yeah.
instead of the Mormons. And
that's kind of the Star Rover entry then. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to the last story we're going to be looking at tonight, Judgment of the Desert. Anybody want to take this on?
Well, I can talk about this one. I actually really like this one, the Judgment of the Desert. Now, this is the characters in it. Stan Brannigan, Spike is I don't think there was a last name for him, but Spike. So the story starts out that they're down in Mexico. Stan Brannigan is down in Mexico. He's coming into a bar at nighttime. Some old guy he's comes out of the doorway. He's been shot in the back.
Sour
And
Sanson.
yes, our Sanson. And Stan, he hears his last words. He says something about the left barrel, and then he dies. And then Hanson again comes out, and he's the bar owner, and he says to Stan, did the old man say anything, or did he have any last words? And Stan says, no, there was no last words. So he goes on about his business. Then Spike comes up to Stan and says, "Hey, and he kind of starts talking to him. I forget exactly what he says or what the conversation is, but he says maybe we should kind of get together, start working together, because he tells him the story about the gold and Pancho Villa, and that Sour Sanson knows where the gold is, and then it's quite possible the left barrel is referring to a map or something. That's so they go to his cabin, and they get an old Spanish double barrel weapon, and Stan finds the map in the left barrel. So they go off into the desert. I'm probably like forgetting a lot of stuff, but they go off and follow the map into the desert, and they figure, okay, Hanson's going to be following us, but we'll try to avoid him. Hopefully he's not coming after us. And they come across a woman in the desert, wandering in the desert. Now she is a runaway bride. She's kind of escaped. Her father was trying to marry her off to some man that she didn't like, and her horse got away, and they just by happenstance come upon her, and her name was it Joan?
It
I
was
think it was
Joan.
Joan.
It's Joan. Yeah.
Yeah,
Joan
Joan
Kirby.
again.
Yeah. Joan
Yes, yeah.
Kirby. Kirby.
So
There you go.
yeah, so they're traveling together to get to the gold, and at first Spike is he doesn't really pay much attention to her. He's a little mean to her, you know, and then he finds out that her brother had been killed by this gunman by the name of Mike O'Mara, and immediately Spike, he hears this, and he changes his attitude towards Joan. He starts being kinder to her, helping her up onto the horse and that kind of stuff. So that you wonder what's going on about that. But they get to the location where apparently the gold is. Again, I think I'm leaving a whole bunch of stuff out, but Spike goes off to kind of check the back trail, and I think this is at nighttime. And Stan actually finds the gold, or was it Stan who found the gold?
It was Stan who finds the gold.
It was Stan who found the gold. That's right.
But
And then
actually, they start digging, or they find the area, and so Spike tells, you know, Spike pulls out a rock. They find a whole, what looks like a little cave with a big rock that had been jammed into it. So Spike pulls out the rock, and
some
they
leather
go in, and
bags.
they see the gold inside this little cave.
Yeah. And this goal was to finance Pancho Villa's revolution down in Mexico, but Pancho Villa was captured and killed, and Sour Sanson's gone. So they feel, well, nobody else belongs to this gold. So I mean, it's basically ours. So they pull the gold out of the cave, and they make camp, right? And then I think that's when Spike kind of goes off to check the back trail, and then Hanson, who had kind of come around, he's kind of been following them, but surreptitiously, and he didn't come upon the back trail. He came a different way, and he came upon Stan and the girl, but there was also, his men there, but there was also the man that Joan was running away from. So they're all there, and they capture Stan and Joan. There was Explain to me the gunfight. Now I forgot about the gunfight. There was a little bit of
Yeah,
a
the
gunfight, but like Stan kills one of the guys, right? When
yeah
they come
the
upon him,
when they are first get set upon by Hanson and his men, Stan is able to take off one shot, but he's shooting at Hanson. But one of
and then one of
Hanson's
the
men
guys,
jumps in front and gets hit by the bullet and gets killed.
and then he wakes up.
And
Stan wakes up,
somebody else shoots at Stan, and the bullet hits him in the head, but only grazes him
Raises.
only
and
grazes him.
knocks
That
him
happens
right
a lot.
out.
So he comes to, and then Jonah's tied up, and he sees the lay of the land, who these guys are, and what's going on. And of course, they're all wondering where Spike is. Hanson thinks that Spike, oh, he saw what happened and he just took off. He left you in the lurch, kind of thing. And of course he didn't. Spike, uh, Hanson kills. What's the guy's name?
Harmer.
Yeah, these
Harmer
names.
makes a return.
Yeah.
Apparently
Harmer.
things didn't work out with Joe to the
Yeah. So
Career
Harmer
change.
says no. Harmer says no. I'm taking the girl, and then Hanson says, well, no, I want the gold, and I want the girl too. And then he just shoots Hanson as Hanson's kind of trying to get his gun out, so
no,
he shoots
Hanson shoots
him.
Harmer.
Hanson Sushi. Yeah.
Hanson shoots
Hanson
Harmer.
shoots Harmer, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. and then that's about the time that Spike kind of steps in, and he's gets his gun out, he's shooting everybody, but he gets shot up in the process
Yeah.
as well. And that's when I guess I can say the spoiler. Should I not say the
Yeah.
spoiler?
Spoilers
So
if you're still with us at this point. So
yeah, so he admits that he is the gunfighter Mike O'Mara, the killer. And when he killed Joan Kirby's brother, who was an innocent, and he didn't really realize that at the time, it really kind of affected him. And that's when he kind of disappeared, and he changed his name, and wanted to, I mean, try to be a better person, I imagine. But he admitted this at the end, and he says, give my share of the gold to Joan,
yeah.
because I killed her brother, that kind of thing. So you know it, not the greatest synopsis, guys, but that's pretty much the
No,
gist of the story. I really enjoyed this story.
Yeah.
This
This
was one
this
of
was a
my
great story.
yeah, one of my favorites. I gave it, I think, a 4.5 out of 5.
I know in my video I thought it was weak. It was the weaker than Drums of the Sunset. Only because you knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
There's,
Yeah,
early on there was a lot of the allusions to Mike O'Mara, and
Yeah.
Spike's like,
yeah,
don't say
you
that
saw
name.
it coming. It was
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
so you
projected.
do see it coming. But now, when I
Yeah.
I, I had been thinking about it the last couple of days, um, I mean, so some great things about the story is the action right at the beginning, right? Sarah
Yeah,
Sanson, bam, the mystery, it really goes. They go to his cabin or whatever, get the map. So that's fantastic. The Michael Mara thing is going to come up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because
but I mean,
they were saying, if I can interrupt you just real quick,
yeah, yeah,
Stan's, because as they were at the cabin, they see a Mexican who's watching them as they find the map, who's one of
right.
Hanson's men. So Spike whips out his gun and shoots at him as quickly as possible. And
Yeah,
Stan says, "Wow, that was so
yeah,
wonderful. The only person I've ever heard of who could do something like that was Mike O'Mara." And
exactly.
that's what Spike, don't ever mention his name to me again.
That's right.
yeah. But
So
but it kind of like we're in on it then.
Yeah.
exactly right, and that's how I've
Right?
changed my mind over the last couple of days. Where I'm like, oh well, no. I mean, it's where Drums of the Sunset, the foreshadowing is for the purpose of I don't know what you would call it. Here, this isn't so much foreshadowing, but yeah, like you're in on it. You're going along with it, waiting for the moment,
Yeah.
waiting that for the moment that Michael Mara is revealed. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think now when I think about it, I've changed my mind on that. The one thing I did not like about this though is there is that big chunk of exposition at the end,
Yeah.
um, where Steve and Joan are captured, and you hear how it all went down and how they got captured and how they bumped into what's his face, Harmer, and
Yeah.
all that.
yeah.
So that that diminished the story, I think, for me when the first time I read it. Um, but yeah, in retrospect,
But
it's quite endearing.
Stan immediately hates Harmer,
Yeah.
just because he's
Yes,
already in love with Joan, right? And then
yes,
he sees this Harmer guy. He says, "Oh, I hate him more than anybody,"
Because
right?
he's a
Which was
rich.
funny.
Maybe he found some gold or something.
yeah.
But one of the things I've found interesting is that this story actually is taking place in the 1920s
Oh,
because
is
Oh,
it?
Pancho Villa was assassinated in the early 1920s.
that's
So,
right.
Oh,
That's
oh
right. He
yeah.
was.
so
Yeah.
this actually takes place in Mexico in the 1920s. That Howard wrote it up as a Western,
Oh,
and
Yeah.
uh, you know one of the things because you find out in the big exposition that Evan hates so much is
I
that
don't know that I
Hanson
hate it.
that Hanson and his men, once the Mexican who didn't get shot tells them what's going on, they figure, okay, they got a map, and Hanson figures, well, I guess the way they're heading, they're going to the El Diablo Mountains or the Inferno Mountains, and bad Spanish on Bob's because I think he
Yeah.
Canyon uh, Los Infernos, which is just
Yeah.
Canyon and the Infernos instead of that should be Canyon del Infernos. But
Hmm.
sorry, uh,
Yeah.
but Hans and his men, they're trailing them, And that's when they run into Harmer, who has hired a Mexican guide to chase after Joan. And so the Mexican guide knows this area very well, even better than Spike did. So he's able to quickly take them to where they need to go and get them to where they need to be set up. But did y'all catch the mistake that Bob made in the story? The Mexican, nothing happens to the Mexican.
Oh.
It's like, they're all waiting for Spike to show up. And that's when Harmer says, okay, and realizes that, oh, things aren't good for me and Joan. I don't like Hanson. Maybe we better get out of here. And I believe Hanson tells the Mexican to sit down around the fire. So when Hanson gets shot, nothing said about the Mexican. When Spike comes busting in and starts shooting everybody, he shoots everybody, but there's no mention of the Mexican at
No
all.
mention of the Mexican.
There's
Maybe
nothing about. He's
he
just
just
disappeared.
he just
you
stepped
just
into the
have to
shadows.
Yeah, yeah,
assume
yeah.
maybe he got shot in the crossfire. Maybe.
Well, the only thing I can think of is that probably maybe Bob, this is my supposition, my opinion, is that maybe Bob was thinking in his head, well, this Mexican's not a bad guy. He's just been hired to do the job. He's the only one who knows to get around in that area, so I'll just keep him alive to lead them out. So after, the shooting's gone down and it's just Steve, yeah, Stan and Joan left. So, he'll be there to lead them back out to safety. But he
Hmm.
doesn't write it in the story.
That's
It's
funny.
No.
just, Mexicans told to sit down around the fire, and that's the last that's heard
That's
about
it.
him for
Oh,
the rest of the story.
So,
interesting.
so you made the mistake there in saying Steve because of course, but
Yeah.
it is interesting because I read it in the Vultures of Wahpeton. Um, there is an error. There's a typo where Stan is referred to as Steve
You
in the book.
mentioned that in your video,
In
yeah.
the video, yeah. So that made me laugh because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, it's
Oh,
a story without Steve. Ah, no, Steve's gonna make an appearance.
Yeah.
somebody
Uh,
must have said, "Oh no, Bob, not another Steve. We got to change that name." Okay, I'll make it Stan.
but it's
Yeah.
funny that that was
It's,
the I think with this, like with that story, because I read it right after Vultures of Wahpeton.
Well, yeah, in
Um,
comparison, yeah,
yeah, so I think right away that juxtaposition was like, oh, okay, this is just a story. Yeah,
yeah.
but in
I
thinking of it
I
now,
always
right?
enjoy appreciating Howard's writing and how he really knows the landscape, and he knows the differences between a Navajo and a Cherokee Indian and an Arapaho, and because they were all different tribes and they had different attributes, and he knew about the history and just all the stuff that he puts in. He really, you just get that, he really knew what the hell he was writing, and he was just comfortable doing it. And
yeah.
that's what really strikes me about these stories, and they hold up so well. And these were written in the late 20s and
Late
30s,
20s
before
and then
westerns
early
really.
30s, then sort of a break, and then again in
Yeah,
the mid 30s. So,
there was no
yeah.
Louis L'Amour, there was no, all the biggies in western fiction at the time. He was just kind of writing his own thing for the most part. I guess Zane Grey was around,
Yeah.
and like you said, Bret Hart and Ambrose Bierce, but I think he was just kind of doing his own thing, Bob,
Yeah. And
with
yeah,
these.
he did
And he
like
did.
Zane Grey too. So he had a couple of
Yeah,
Zane Grey books in his collection. Uh,
yeah,
yeah, talking on that, in Drums of the Sunset, he drops information at the beginning when he's introducing the character Steve Harmer. And he said, Steve's from Texas and he's riding Texas style where he's got his leg over the saddle horn, you
yeah.
know, instead of, both on either side in the stirrups. So so that's was attributed to Texans to riding that style, you know.
Yeah, which is cool. And I love those little details, just little things like that, that he
Yeah.
put into it. I
I
was
mean,
reading, I told you I was reading this Ray Hogan paperback today, and the Indians that were in it were the Kiowas. And he made a mistake because at the beginning of the story, he said that the Kiowas weren't good trackers. And then towards the end of the book, he said they were excellent trackers.
oh,
So
interesting.
it's like, did you not know what you were talking, or are you just kind of making it up?
Yeah.
Like I love the story, but little things like that,
Yeah.
you got to get the details right, man. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Kiowa were running buddies with the Comanches here in Texas and
Yeah.
the Oklahoma territories. So,
Right. Yeah.
um, you know, talking about his great writing, he's got some great lines in this story that I love. He's got, when Hanson, they arrive and they take Joan and Steve, Stan, good Lord,
Are you kidding?
captive. And, they're talking about Hanson's guy that Stan shot. Hanson, saying, "Oh, that's okay. Generally somebody's gonna die with the treasures involved, and I'm glad it wasn't me." And then he says, "And a treasure that don't cost some lives ain't no good." So, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then after he shoots Harmer, Hanson then says, "Another one marked up against the gold." So, you know, he's that, and then of course you got this. I'm sure women, if they read this, probably will be offended by this, but Stan says this after he starts falling in love with Joan, and after Spike, starts. I can't remember whether it was before or after he learned that she was Tom Kirby's sister, but he tells her that she's going to get a share of the gold that they found, and she's like, "Really? You mean that just for me?" And he said, "Yeah." And so she starts crying. And so Stan says, you know, dames is sure queer critters. They squall when they're sad and squall when they're glad. So,
I remember that.
it's just
Yeah.
wonderful, just little picaresque stuff that he writes in this story. And it's a very nice story to have and to read. I can't remember whether I don't think it ever got published before he died.
No,
Let me
no.
check and see what.
No, it wasn't published. I think it appeared in the 70s in some sort of fanzine or
Yeah,
pamphlet, I think. Yeah.
I would
Yeah. I
imagine
didn't.
it's.
I didn't
Yeah,
write that down.
let me see. Oh, let me go to story title index and let's see here. Yeah, the first time it was uh, printed was The End of the Trail Western Stories by Bison Books in 2005. However, it
Oh,
was showing an alternate title, Showdown at Hell's Canyon.
that one. That's the one I got here.
Yeah, and that was in the Vultures in 1973, and then the Zebra Vultures of Wahpeton, 1975.
I I guess we're going to talk about it next time. But the one story I didn't really like was Gunman's Debt.
Yeah,
You know, and
yeah.
but yeah, I guess we'll talk about. I don't know. You talk about it next time, next go around. But yeah, no, Judgment of the Desert. I thought it was a good one. Really enjoyed it. And you know, sometimes you just got to put your criticism on the back burner. Sometimes with
Absolutely.
some of these older stories, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because as just one thing after another on the coincidences, in both Drums of the Sunset and then Judgment of the Desert, we're just having coincidence after coincidence popping up on each one. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, okay, you're not that bad of a writer, Bob. I can understand, especially Drums of the Sunset, you're writing, it's early in your career and you're writing for a general audience. So you're probably thinking, they'll love this, they'll see this coming, and it'll be wonderful for them. So I'll put it in the story. But Judgment of the Desert, he'd been writing for a few years probably by the time he wrote that. So you could probably do a little bit better on cutting down on the all the various coincidences that happen in that story.
yeah. And you know, how many times did we read about getting your head creased by a bullet and it just knocks you out? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're in the head with a bullet, whether it's a crease or not, man, that's a pretty major thing.
It's
Have
not
either
I
of
nice.
don't
you
cover
read
from back from that real quick.
the any of the hero pulp character, the Avenger?
Yeah,
I have not. No.
And
yeah.
his go-to move was he would carry a 22 caliber gun and a knife called Mike and Ike. And
Huh.
his go-to move was to use the 22 caliber gun to shoot people on the top, just the top of their heads to knock
Just a
them out.
strafe.
Yeah. So, so what do you guys think so far of reading these stories and poems?
I mean, I've had a lot of fun with them. Like I said, it's not a literary genre that I'm really familiar with, but so much of exposure through my life. I love Westerns. Who doesn't love Westerns? Um, and it's like, yeah, it hits all the marks. Like it's Western. It's yes, this is Westerns. This is what you can expect. It feels natural. Uh, they're pleasing. I the few others I've read, given, the Bob stuff, it's fun to find the names, track down the
Yeah,
names. I mean, like Wild Water, there's
yeah,
Jim
Oh,
Reynolds, and there's Jim Reynolds in Valley of the Lost, and there's John
yeah.
Brill in Wild Water, and there's John Brill in, Thing from the Mound. So that's just that fun side game that you get to play when you read Howard's stuff.
yeah.
Um, but just wonderful. So I mean, I have to pick up the book from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press.
The
How big is
like
how thick is that book, John?
This, I think, is the biggest book that we've done that we do. So it is 621 pages. No, I'm
And
sorry. There's
big one, 23.
623 pages.
and is it all the westerns in there?
It's all of his straight westerns,
Okay.
all of his weird westerns, and then his poems, and then his juvenilia westerns, and then all the miscellaneous either synopses for some of the stories or stories that he kind of started but stopped writing are all in it. The
He
only,
had an alternate for the Devil's Joker, I think. Was there an
yeah,
alternate in there
I
for
think
the
so.
for
Yeah,
Steve Allison's story? And it was, I guess, I haven't read the alternate version, but I'm assuming it's just a different ending
yeah,
because the Vultures of Wahpeton had two alternate endings.
Yeah.
Did
yeah.
uh, did that one, the Zebra book you have, Evan? Did that have the two
It doesn't
versions
have
or
the two. No, it just has the Glenn Lord calls it the more realistic ending. So it's
the
the
good
less
ending?
happy ending. No,
That's the
the
only
less happy ending. The
less
the
happy. No, that's what I. Yeah, that's the
yeah,
good
yeah, yeah.
ending.
Yeah,
That's the
yes,
only
yes.
ending you need.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah,
But it's funny not to include it, right?
yeah.
Especially since it was included in the original publication.
Yeah, in the original publication, yeah. But
Mhm.
Yeah.
reading it this way in the names, that's what really threw me off. It was starting to get a little confusing. Reading it like through
Like a
from
deluge. Yeah.
in order. Yeah,
But that's definitely a book to pick up. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Uh, I think
Yeah.
anybody too that's seen my video, everybody's like, "Oh, we got to read Bob's Westerns." So
Yeah.
got to read Bob's Westerns.
yeah,
Because, as we were saying, or as Mark Finn was pointing out in the recent boxing video, most of Howard's writings were humorous boxing or boxing stories or humorous westerns or western stories. And he made the most money during his life from the humorous boxing and the humorous western stories. So,
yeah. That's
you know,
odd, eh? I mean, you really don't think about that, but yeah, I guess he wrote a lot of them.
yeah.
That was his bread and butter. Those stories. I
And
remember reading Pit of the Serpent years ago, and I love that story. And I've got to pick up the boxing stories one of these days soon.
yeah.
I think they're my favorite.
Yeah, they're so good. They're so good. The ones I've
Well,
read. I've
you,
got the Iron Man in paperback, so it's got a few of them in there. The Dennis Dorgan ones, I think,
yeah,
if I remember correctly.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
you now know that there's only one official Dennis Dorgan story. Everything else is just a rewritten, unsold
Costigan.
Steve Costigan story.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I was going to say, Evan, when you get around to getting the Breckinridge Elkins books, you might find that they are as good as the Sailor Steve Costigan
Okay.
stories. And, I love them, but, you know, I can't wait when we get around because I need Mark Finn. He's the busy man. But we're going to do eventually a part two of the Breckinridge Elkins video, and we're going to start diving in to the Breckinridge Elkins knockoffs. And some, they're different in many ways from Breckinridge Elkins, especially the two that he wrote the most stories on outside of Breckinridge, Elkins, Buckner J. Grimes, and Pike Bearfield. And, the first story with Buckner J. Grimes in it is just a really wonderful story. It's basically he goes out of town because, he's just too wild for the town in Texas. So his father says, go to Arizona and go gold hunt and go gold prospecting in Arizona. So as he's heading out of Texas, yeah, he runs into a gang and he joins up with the gang, and this gang is terrorizing this town. So they go in and they're terrorizing this town, hurting and killing and stealing, whatever. And, the leader of the gang thinks it would be funny to make Buckner J. Grimes the sheriff of the town. And so Buckner is sheriff. He's seeing all this going on and how the people are suffering. And he's like, I don't like this. Well, son of a bitch, I'm the sheriff, so I guess I better do something
Yeah,
about it. And it's just a wonderful little story. Just to read that, it's not
Is
quite, the humorous part's really at the beginning because it's got one of the funniest openings of any of Howard's stories I've ever read. But, it gets kind of serious towards the latter half. And it's just wonderful that way. And then to me, his Pike Bearfield character is just absolutely the most, you know, why, Bob, why did you kill yourself? Because the things he was starting to do with Pike Bearfield, especially with the last two stories, were just unbelievably incredible in what they were going to lead to if he'd stayed on what he was doing. Because, especially the last Pike Bearfield story, he opens it up where Pike's telling a story about one of his ancestors who saved the United States during the War of 1812. So he was going to be setting himself up where he could start talking about Pike Bearfield's entire family through the history of the United States and allow him to talk about stuff in the history of the United States that interested him in the stories. It's just, oh man, why?
yeah. What could have
yeah,
been? Yeah, man.
awful, man. The
But
things
I
he
was,
could have done.
yeah, I will leave off. And sadly, I did not print it up, but Bob, when he's decided he was going to start writing Westerns, one of the pulp writers, Carl Jacoby or Jacoby, was asking that I think he did say, this is when he was talking to him about old Garfield's heart. And he was saying that he had never really decided to try and write stories set in the Southwest of Western themes because he was worried that because he knew so much and he was so deep in living it, that it would throw the story off and make the story unreadable to anybody else who did not know what was going on. And that with old Garfield's heart, he thought, okay, I finally had a breakthrough on how to write these things. And starting with
Hmm.
old Garfield's heart on, all of his Westerns from that point on, you can see he's starting to put Texas, the history of Texas, the history of the Southwest, the history of gunfighters into the stories. He'd finally figured out how he wanted to do it where it wouldn't come off as getting so deep in the weeds on details and whatnot. So, y'all have anything lasting to say at this point, or anything you want to plug coming up for your videos?
When are you gonna publish this one?
I will probably do this. I don't know. I don't because this would be great for the June on the range uh, thing to do
Oh,
it. The first week of June because
soon enough.
yeah,
Yeah,
gonna be busy the second week of June. So might put it up
yeah.
the first week. They're supposed to be in the process of setting up another video. Hopefully, they get done before the end of May, which we can put up towards the end of May or do a live stream where we can talk about, last minute stuff about Howard Days, what's happening, what the schedule is, any other
Oh, yeah.
questions people have about Howard Days or about Robert E. Howard in general. Uh, so I don't know, but if if I decide to publish this during May, then it'll probably be in about 2 weeks because we got the Solomon Kane video going up this Thursday, and I usually like to try and space out the videos every 2 weeks to give them a chance to breathe.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
does that apply to your schedule Evan.
Oh, well, I mean, this will come out after that. I'm going to do a live stream with Jim Zub.
All
Um,
right.
yeah, Dan's going to join me, and so is Lion. So that'll be nice.
Okay.
Give a chance for those guys. Well, definitely for Dan to meet Jim before Howard Days, and we'll talk about Howard Days too, and plug that for sure
Okay.
between the four of us. Uh, yeah, I don't know what else. I've got so many books on the go. I got to do something with the boxing stuff. I
Yeah.
have three different paperback editions of Iron Man or the Iron Man. So I want to kind of dig into some of those.
Yeah.
Um, there's, I think between all of them, there's the two stories that are the same, between the ones I have. I'm not much of a collector. I
Yeah.
grab what I can when I can. I don't go crazy with money and stuff like that. So that might be fun to do. But
I'd
yeah, I
be
don't know.
curious. I'd be curious what you think of Louis L'Amour when you finally get around to
Yeah.
reading his.
Yeah,
He's very,
so I mean,
he could be very formulaic, but he kind of gave the people what they wanted, I think. And
yeah,
some of them are just really really well told westerns.
I mean, I know they're so plentiful. So
Yeah.
whatever ones I grab, I don't know if they're good ones or not, but
Well,
I've been
any
been
from
bitten
the
by a bug
Sackett,
now.
any from the Sackett series,
Yeah.
you're is a good bet they're going to be good. You know, the
Yeah, I'll check them out.
Daybreakers, Sackett's Land, Lando, any of the Sackett ones are probably a good bet.
Or,
I'll take a peek and I'll email you a picture
Yeah,
of what they are. Yeah, yeah.
I would also,
yeah,
if you look at his, because they do have collections of his short stories, and I think the first two are his Western, some of his
yeah,
Western short stories that you can
yeah.
still buy.
Oh,
But
good.
the short story that got turned into the movie Hondo that he wrote, the novelization of Hondo, that's a very good book if
Yeah.
you haven't seen the
The,
movie.
I've seen the movie, but
the
yeah,
gift of Cochise was a
Yeah, that's
short
what it is. The
story.
gift,
Yeah,
of
that the movie
Cochise.
based the movie on, and then he did the novelization of the screenplay. But
Okay.
yeah,
yeah.
Hondo is an excellent story.
It's
Love that.
funny because as a genre, it's just so natural, right? Like it's in our pores. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, just
Oh,
to read them is something I have to do.
in one of the Louis L'Amour short story collections, there's a short story called "The Pack Saddle Affair," and it was adapted to a Maverick show. Well, like it was an episode of the
Yeah,
Maverick
yeah.
TV series,
Okay.
and they
Yeah.
used a Louis L'Amour story for that episode. Just little interesting fact there.
Okay.
I
Good.
love
Yeah,
that Maverick series.
me too.
It was great.
I grew up on that, man. I love that show.
Though
I've got
I remember a scene from Maverick where he's throwing plastic darts.
Yeah.
ah
Yeah, but my favorite one was the one where they did the parody of Gunsmoke. So
oh yeah,
and that one was just absolutely hilarious.
and where James Garner plays his own pappy.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
Pappy used to say it was James Garner, all looking like an
Yeah.
old guy.
yeah.
Yeah, such a good show.
What
All
video
right.
do you have coming up, Jim?
Yeah.
I've got nothing planned so far. I've got a couple ideas. I just my
Yeah.
videos are just seat of the pants kind of thing. If
Same.
whatever I feel like doing, and I'll
Yeah.
sit down and talk about it and then put it up. So I've got a couple things. I should do a Western one. Like now that we've done this, and you did yours, maybe I'll just do one on the Westerns. We'll see. I mean, June's coming up. Oh, I got PI July, Private Eye July is
Mm,
coming up, which will
okay.
be here before you know it. And so I've got a new like a tic tac toe board with prompts that for people to read Private Eye novels. I've got you could do the classic PIs or from the 70s onward or movie tie-ins or novelizations, historical PIs. So there's different options that you can read for Private Eye July.
Oh, good
So
stuff.
yeah, that's I only did it last year, so I'm hoping this year is going to be a good one for that.
That-
And like I said, July will be here before you know it. I mean, June on the range in another month.
uh,
I always enjoy that. That's got to be probably my favorite reading event is June on the range.
all right then. Well, this is our first part of our look at Robert E. Howard's Western Tales book. We will be doing a second part. We'll be. I can't even speak anymore. Where we will be looking at probably mainly. I think we will probably be sticking mainly to the short stories, unless there's a poem that is of some sort of significance, which we'll look at. And we'll probably do a part two. maybe in about another month and a half or 2 months or so, roughly around that time when everybody's schedule looks wonderful and can met. Good Lord, I'm having a stroke or something, or
Don't
match
say
up
that.
their schedules, and
Yeah.
we may get some more people involved in this, hopefully. So thank you to two gentlemen for doing this, and thank you to everybody else for watching. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you again soon on the channel.
Thank you, John. Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
John. Thank you.